Welcome to BDJ Daily Torah, a service of B'nai David Judaic Congregation in Los Angeles. Here is Assistant Rabbi David Stein.
This morning we were talking about the pasuk in this week's parsha of Lo tasur min hadavar asher yagidu lach yamin u'smol, that when we have a question, we go to the prophet, the judge, the kohen of the generation, and ask the question to the leader of the generation. And the Torah says in this week's parsha that whatever the answer that's given, we are obliged to follow it. In fact, this pasuk is the source for the entire kind of system of rabbinic authority that we have. What gives the rabbis the right to, make Hanukkah? Tell us that we need to observe Purim. Tell us to eat on separate dishes or wait between milk and meat. What gives them that right? Right? And it actually happens to be that it's this week's parsha that says every generation, you got a question, go to the shofet, go to the judge of your time, and their answer will be binding upon you. Which raises a question on its own. Because if the Torah is commanding us to follow what the judge, what the rabbis say, then violating what the rabbis say doesn't just violate the rabbi's words, the judge's words, the shofet's, the prophet's words, it violates this commandment in the Torah. And so we kind of have a catch-22, because we treat rabbinic laws leniently. We treat rabbinic laws, we have leniencies on rabbinic laws that we don't have on biblical laws. You can't violate a biblical law unless there's a life at stake. Like pikuach nefesh is really the only kind of category of leniency that we have on biblical laws. Rabbinic laws are much more lenient. We can violate them in a whole range of circumstances. But how could that be? Because really, every time you violate a rabbinic law, you're violating this week's commandment of Lo tasur min hadavar asher yagidu lach. Do not deviate from what they tell you. So it's really fascinating because the Ramban actually says anybody who violates a rabbinic law doesn't just violate the rabbis. He's also over be'aseh, says the Ramban, that anyone who violates, the rabbi says, violates a deoraita law, violates this prohibition in our parsha. But the Ramban, of course, asks this question: well, how could that be? How could it be that violating a d'Rabbanan really violates a biblical law as well, violating a rabbinic law? How could that be? So Ramban says something really amazing, and Richard kind of mentioned this. It may not be what you meant. This morning, he said, well, what does this possibly mean? Rich is like, well, the rabbis are the ones who interpret it to mean that they get the authority. It's potentially, I don't want to say it this way, but potentially could be seen as somewhat self-serving. The rabbis are the ones reading the law or interpreting the law that gives them the authority. Says the Ramban the following. He says, why is it that we can be lenient on d'Rabbanan laws if the Torah says that we have to follow them? So it's very simple. The rabbis themselves, the prophets, the judges themselves, when they created the system of laws, when they created their laws, they did it with the following stipulation. They did it on condition that their laws would not be seen as of the same level as biblical laws. In other words, they built into their system of law, to the rabbinic laws, they built into it the condition that they would have a lower level of stringency. They would have greater leniency than the biblical laws that we observe. Torah says, Lo tasur min hadavar asher yagidu lach yamin u'smol. You cannot violate them. Can't go to the right. You can't go to the left. Says the Ramban, if you want to be more strict on a d'Rabbanan, if you want to treat a d'Rabbanan as if it's a deoraita, you want to treat a rabbinic law as if it's a biblical law, that would be violating the words of the rabbis. the pasuk says you have to do as the rabbis, as the shofet says. And if the shofet says to treat their laws leniently, then that's what you have to do. And so we kind of have this really fascinating. I don't even know how to. I don't know. It's the opposite of a tautology thing, but where it's not that the rabbis have authority because they give themselves the authority. It's that the rabbis actually have less authority because they take less authority. In interpreting this pasuk, they say, yeah, the Torah says that you got to listen to us, but we are not going to assume that that means that there is a biblical status or there's biblical backing to our laws. We are going to treat them, we're going to create them, we're going to craft them as if they are more lenient, as if this whole system has all of the leniencies built in, because we recognize that anything we say actually can't have the same status as a law from God, as a law from the Torah. And so that's kind of the Ramban's solution to this conundrum. Because again, if the Torah commands us to follow them, then not following them would violate the Torah. And says the Ramban, yeah, you got to follow them. But you also have to follow them when they say you have to be lenient. And that's why we kind of have this whole system, or that's how we can have this whole system of rabbinic laws, of rabbinic leniencies.
You've been listening to BDJ Daily Torah, a service of B'nai David Judea Congregation in Los Angeles. To learn more about our synagogue, visit bnaidavid.com.